Hi everyone, so I hope you're doing well. This video is all to do with control drugs and looking at their different schedules. So Schedule 1 are drugs that are not medicinally used, for example, hallucinogenic drugs, ecstasy type substances, and cannabis. So you'd need a Home Office license for the production, the possession, and the supply of these medications, and you'd also need to log them into a CD register if you have any Schedule 1 CDs received or supplied by the pharmacy. So Schedule 2, which are used a lot more by patients, are opiates, for example, such as morphine, methadone, oxycodone, for example, and also major stimulants such as amphetamines and ketamine. So there are specific legal requirements on the prescription for these medications. I'm going to do a separate video all to do with the legal requirements for controlled drug prescriptions, private controlled drug prescriptions, and normal prescriptions. So, for example, one of the requirements would be to state the quantity in both words and figures, and to actually state the formulation of the medication on the prescription. And for a control drug, you're also not allowed to say take as directed. You need to be more specific. There needs to be direction on the prescription for that. Also, there are safe custody rules for Schedule 2 drugs. So they need to be inside an actual CD cabinet, which has a lock and a key, and that needs to be on the pharmacist at all times, except for some liquid preparations and quinol barbitone, and that can actually be left outside. So any Schedule 2s that are received by the pharmacy and that are dispensed and actually handed to a patient needs to be logged into a CD register. I will also be making a video about CD registers, how to fill them out, what to do when there's an error, and stuff like that. So a pharmacist and other people under the 2001 Regulations Act are allowed to possess and supply Schedule 2 drugs. So there needs to be witness destruction, so it's not enough for the pharmacist to just destruct the control drug. There also needs to be a witness to view this. And also only prescribers within the UK can actually prescribe Schedule 2 drugs. So any prescriptions from the EU for Schedule 2 drugs are actually not allowed to be dispensed by law. So Schedule 3 medications include barbiturates, for example, buprenorphine, and there's also midazolam and tramadol and temazepam, and any salt versions of the drugs above. So unlike the Schedule 2, there are no requirements to put these inside a control drug register, so you wouldn't need to keep a running balance of Schedule 3 medications. However, you do need to keep the invoices that you get with the medications. So an invoice is literally when you get a delivery, you'll get a piece of paper and it will state what medications entered the pharmacy. So you need to keep that piece of paper for 2 years. And witness destruction isn't actually a legal requirement, but it's always a good practice. And also, most of the medications require prescription requirements and safe custody. However, so they'd need to be in a control drug cabinet. However, midazolam and tramadol don't actually need to be kept inside the cupboard, so they can be left outside. And again, with the Schedule 2 drugs, Schedule 3s can only be prescribed with a doctor or an independent prescriber within the UK. Schedule 4s can be split into two parts. So you have Part 1, which includes benzodiazepines, so for example, diazepam. However, temazepam and midazolam are actually Schedule 3 drugs, just because they can be a bit more addictive compared to diazepam. And also non-benzodiazepine hypnotics, so the Z drugs, such as zolpidem and zopiclone, and Sativex. And then you've got Schedule 4 Part 2, which are androgenic and anabolic steroids, which includes HCG and non-human HCG, and somatropin, yeah, I think I've said that right. So these medications, you don't actually need to keep any records for them, and you don't need to keep any invoices either, except for the Sativex, and you don't need to keep these medications in safe custody, so they can be out on the benches and on the shelves. What's different with Schedule 4s is someone within the EU can actually prescribe these medications, so it doesn't have to be a prescriber in the UK. And also, with Schedule 3s and 2s and 1s, you can't do an emergency supply. However, with Schedule 4s and 5s, as we'll see, you can actually do an emergency supply, but only for 5 days maximum. And also, there doesn't have to be any witness destruction. And then finally, Schedule 5s include codeine, pholcodine, and morphine. So we've seen morphine above as a Schedule 2, but here morphine is at a much lower strength, so it's a Schedule 5. So all of these are exempt from the CD requirements, but you do have to keep the invoices for 2 years. And again, you can do an emergency supply for 5 days. And someone outside of the UK, for example, can prescribe these medications. So extra information is it's always good practice to supply 30 days of controlled drugs, 2, 3s and 4s, but it's not a legal requirement, and 5s as well. So all prescriptions are valid for 28 days from when the prescription was actually written up by the prescriber. So you have to count it from the day that that prescription was written up, or the day that it's stated in the prescription, because sometimes a prescription could be printed out on one day, but there might be a note and it will say, can you dispense after a few days? So then you'd count 28 days from the date it actually states on the prescription, not the date it was printed out, if that makes sense. So you can't do an emergency supply for controlled drugs 2s and 3s at the request of a patient, but you can do it for Schedule 4s and 5s, but for a maximum of 5 days only. And when handing out a controlled drug, you'd hope to see sufficient ID to make sure that you're giving it out to the right person, or that it will get to the right person. And also you have to keep a record for Schedules 1, 2s and 3s, but not 4s and 5s unless it's Sativex. But invoices for 3s and 5s should be kept. Okay, thank you for listening. Good luck.